All right, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. We are back for another episode of the Broxten Digital Show. My name is Broxten Davis. I'm your host. I'm also an analyst at one of the top advertising agencies in the world. And today we're going to bring, another awesome guest on. We've had a little bit of a hiatus on the podcast, been reworking the content strategy a little bit. And I'm super excited. We have some awesome guests in the pipeline and some really cool stuff coming up for everybody. But today, we're picking back up right where we left off. We have another amazing guest from the agency world. He comes in with a ton of experience, is actually a Michigan State grad, so all my MSU people out there, you're definitely going to relate to this one, but has a lot of great advice for everybody in the next generation that's trying to break into advertising and marketing. Right now, he currently sits as the Chief Creative Officer at Publicis Media. Ladies and gentlemen, Eric Levin.
Nice to meet everybody. Thank you so much for having me, Broxton. I appreciate that.
Yeah, no, thanks so much for making the time to hop on, Eric. I know you're a super busy guy, so really appreciate the time and super excited to kind of get into everything. You
Sure.
have pretty crazy position over at Publicis and so cool that you're an MSU grad. I mean, just proof that MSU grads are out here doing awesome stuff. But I mean, first thing I kind of want to get into though, Eric, is just, you coming from MSU and now having such kind of a storied career in advertising. What were maybe some of your biggest takeaways in college and how can people nowadays kind of leverage that same thing that you did?
No, yeah, I hate to age myself. It was a little while ago when I was at MSU, but I'm still a fan. I was wearing my Sparty shirt yesterday, actually, and luckily it still fits. But I would say when I was in college, if I'm being completely honest with you and your audience, I wouldn't have called myself an academic. I came from a very, very small school in Michigan to a much larger university in Michigan State and felt a little bit lost for the first year or so as I got used to that, and then into my second year. And honestly, it wasn't probably until my third year that I took my first marketing class, and I realized that that's what I was kind of missing in terms of how consumer behavior affects decisioning and where and how brands play a role in all of that. And that actually was where I really started to focus. That's when I found, something that I was genuinely interested in. I did actually do well in those classes and was able to luckily parlay that into my first job in the advertising, first internship, and then first job in the advertising world right after I graduated.
That's such a cool story, and I can definitely relate. I'm also from a super small town, and going to MSU was such a culture shock. And I definitely also did immediately start focusing on academia the second I got to East Lansing. I definitely enjoyed the city a little bit too. But no, that's such a cool story, and definitely I think it really goes to show how like when you're in college, even once you start getting into that sophomore junior level, you may not have everything figured out. Like you might still, at 20 years old, find something that you never heard of before. For me, I was a pre-nursing student and heard about advertising and started learning about it and realized that was my passion. And now here I am. The same thing can happen though. A lot of people I feel like once they pick their major, they have to stick and grind through that. But there's a million different routes you can go, and especially being at a university like Michigan State, there's just so many great resources and everything. I guess like nowadays, what would you say out of the students that you see come in, especially on the creative side, what would you say are one of the biggest things that you see students are lacking coming out of college that maybe they can start to focus on as seniors or early professionals?
Yeah. I think a lot has been said, and not fairly necessarily, that younger generations don't take work as seriously, or they're not as engaged or invested in it. You mentioned we both work at the one of the world's largest advertising, marketing, media firms in the world, and in full transparency, whenever we have interns and or new grads, I am honestly, beyond impressed with their work ethic, the time they put against the things that we have, them doing, even on the intern side, like the genuine desire to want to learn and perform and be part of a team and all of those things. I honestly, Broxton, I think it kind of it runs counter to what a lot of the BS that's out there about younger grads. So, in my opinion, luckily, we haven't really had to sit anyone down and say, look, you're in a position that 1,000 other people would die to be in. And instead, they're just outperforming any semblance of expectation that we had originally. So what I would honestly say, to graduating seniors or people looking for internships or entry level positions or whatnot is, at least speaking from my own perspective, I don't always look for somebody that has the most experience. You're looking for somebody who has the most desire, who has rounded out, the work experience with personal experience, and can bring a perspective to something, that maybe you wouldn't necessarily somebody younger could bring. But honestly, what we tell them all, and I think maybe you and I even touched on this earlier, is, I remind people, and we say this all the time, is like when you walk through the doors at Publicis or anywhere, if you're doing what we're doing anyway, you can't forget that you're a consumer. So your opinion matters. Like if we're looking or to work with a brand or working on a brand that, is aiming to target a younger demographic, and we're asking you to pull together a plan or ideas or anything that is going to resonate with that audience, and you yourself don't believe in what it is that you're proposing, then we want to know. And so I would say, don't be shy with an opinion. I think we look for people to be hand raisers. We look for people to push back. And I think that's really obviously respectfully, but at the same time, like, I would hate to offer anybody advice that says, shut up and do your job. That's not it at all. I think it's the exact opposite of that, provided what you're bringing is, strategic in how it's presented and delivers against what it is that we're aiming to do for the brand or clients that we're working on.
Wow, yeah, that is such a unique perspective. So, like, rather than saying, Gen Z needs to stop doing this or this, it's more like I'd rather hear more of their opinions and, hear what they actually have to say about things.
Of course, of course. I just think, we ask all the time. Obviously, we want to know what they're consuming, how they're interacting. A lot of the conversation that's out there in the world that we occupy, as you well know, is, do people pay attention to the advertisement that's out there? How do we actually get people to want to participate with brands, and the way that they engage on social and emerging platforms, and now, experiential and interactive elements and whatnot. We want to know all of it. And so I think that's a superpower to be able to, harness and turn into something that can be strategically applied to the clients that we're working with.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's just super empowering to hear. And I hope for anybody listening, it's like a nice eye opener of share your opinions. You don't be rude, don't be obnoxious about it. But, people want to hear what the younger generation has to say. We're the first young generation figuring this stuff out. So, definitely, I think Eric has a great point there, and it definitely inspires me to even keep bringing more ideas to the table. I know sometimes I feel like I'm pushing the label a bit too hard, but it's always a good thing to be doing. Now, one thing you probably just heard Eric mention a lot is creative. And that's kind of, where he lives. That is totally his realm. I have been discovering that I'm a little bit more of a creative person than I originally thought in college. I always said, I'm not a creative. I can't draw. Don't involve me in anything creative. But with this podcast and all the other stuff I do, I'm really starting to realize I do actually have quite a bit of creativity. And maybe that could be something that I work in one day. But honestly, sitting in a performance media role, and I know when I was a student, and I'm sure all the other students listening can speak to this, is, you might be interested in creative, or you might even say, hey, I'm going to switch my degree to advertising creative from advertising management. But, I want to hear it from you, Eric. What really does for somebody interested in creative, or getting into that space, what does that really entail, and what are some of the things you can do to start upskilling and breaking in?
Yeah, I mean, well, first of all, you are creative, Brock. You're here, you're doing a podcast, you're having these conversations, you're using your platform to infuse good into the world and help people. So, don't diminish what it is that you're able to get done. I think on the creative side, to be honest, just like content, just like innovation, a lot of these words mean a lot of things. And I think creative today in our world can similarly mean a lot of things. And, there are people who, and I'm not diminishing this, that occupy what I might call more traditional creative roles when you're talking about commercial development and production and everything that goes into that. And then you've got creative on the tech side. Like, we have a head of creative technology, and what does that really mean? And really, what we're looking for in those areas, like I mentioned, are emerging platforms, emerging tech that we should be paying attention to. What do we need to know that's going to help us push the boundaries of interactive content and opportunity forward? So I think those that are led to believe that they, have to follow a certain path and, go to certain schools and take certain majors, and that's the only way that they'll ever be classified as creative, I think is bullshit. And I think instead it's, what is your superpower? What do you bring to the table? That's why we always ask people to share their opinions, because they're coming up with ideas that we wouldn't have thought of. And maybe they themselves didn't feel empowered to say out loud before. But that's creativity. It's something that allows you to harness, great thoughts, great thinking, apply it in a way that we may not have thought of, and bring it to life through those new platforms in ways that people love, engage, and actually want to participate in. And especially when you're talking about it through a brand lens, right? Everybody's first reaction when they see a commercial or they see overt brand messaging is more or less to tune it out, right? We've heard this forever, that the increase in ad blockage, and those that have tuned out commercials and obviously, go out of their way to avoid being advertised to, for better or worse, it's the world we live in. And so I think somebody coming in with an idea that maybe others have said no to, but because they're thinking about it through a completely different means, provides opportunity to actually engage somebody in a different way. So I would say, don't listen to those that have said, well, if you don't go here, and if you don't, work in an ad agency, if you don't deliver the commercial they're looking for, then you're not creative. It's nonsense. I think everybody has the ability to think differently, and it's how you apply that matters.
Man, that is, yeah, probably the best breakdown of what being a creative entails that I've probably ever heard. I know I wish I would have been told that in college, because I definitely would have been much more like open to exploring those kind of roles, where before, I thought it was very much so like you need to be really good at the arts. You need to, like know how to read music, know how to draw, and I just, wasn't quite there, so I thought it wasn't for me. But getting into the industry and hearing things like what you just said, it opens your eyes that literally just being a maker, doing anything, kind of makes you a creative if you're putting yourself out there. So that's super cool. This one's a little bit more surface level, but for any of the people that are like, what do I look for if that is really me? Like what you just said totally resonates. What kind of like entry level roles, or what does it typically look like when you're trying to break in as a creative?
I think, it obviously it all depends on interest level. And I think, the varying fields that exist, if you want to enter the space right now, it's so wide open. Whereas before, if I oversimplify, you had media and you had creative, and they would work together in some capacity, sometimes better than others, but it depended on who was doing what. And I think in this world now, you have such an exploded view, so to speak, of all of the means and areas by which people can enter the creative space. And what I mean is, like, you've got micro dramas now that have come out. You have influencers, you have creators, you've got, short form content, long form content, AI, which I'm sure can get into. I think that the field is so wide open. It just comes down to, what do you envision yourself doing and doing well, and how do you think you can apply whatever that passion is to the job that you ultimately want to have. Obviously, it's still work. I'm not suggesting it's going to be fun every day, but at least if you can take what you love and apply it in some sort of creative fashion, again, on the client or brand side, then the outcome is usually something unexpected and surprising in the best of ways. So I would say, don't necessarily, and I know, again, it's super hard in today's job market, so I'm not playing that down at all, downplaying that. But I would say, if you can, don't rush to the first thing. Think through where you want to be in 1, 3, 5 years, and decide how that current position is going to help get you there, if that's what you want to do. So I know it's a little bit of an obtuse answer, but it really comes down to personal preference, Broxton, and what people want to take away from the roles that they're in.
No, yeah, that is a great breakdown. And like honestly, the main reason I asked is just like, for me on the performance side, it's pretty cut and dry. There's the analyst and you just kind of move up the ranks. With the creatives, you see young people as creative directors, you see quite old people as creative directors. So, it just like you said, can totally vary. But the ones you do see being most successful are those ones, just applying what they're passionate about in a creative sense.
Well,
So that
I would say that your passion outside of what you do as an analyst matters. It goes back to the first question you asked me about, what can people do to sort of be, stand out as candidates. If you have passions outside of work that you can then apply to what you do, or a way to think differently about how you want to do something because of something you're doing away from, your everyday, then that also matters a lot.
No, yeah, I totally agree. I mean, for me, this podcast is a great example.
Yeah,
I
exactly.
didn't know like what would make sense for me to start making content. And then I'm like, why not do it in a way that's gonna, build my professional network too? And it worked out and enabled me to do something that I was putting off. So no, that's a great breakdown, and I hope anybody listening can take that and actually take some action with it, because sometimes in the creative space, if you want to move forward and stuff, like I know I've been there of like, how do I actually take action and go do something? Eric just laid it out right there for you. But now to kind of move away from the creative, now that we kind of have an understanding of what the creative entails, what being a creative is really, and what to kind of look for early on in your creative career, I am dying to hear on some of your experience too. I know obviously your agency experience is going to be almost second to none, especially with the position you're sitting in now. So is there anything over your agency experience, any stops along the way, or just anything that you feel off the bat is super important to share just with all of those years of agency experience?
Yeah, um, I would say that, it's often a long and circuitous route to get to where you want to be. And I don't think my path was necessarily all that different. I started at an ad agency in Detroit. I'm not going to say how long ago, but long enough ago. And, was lucky enough to work in movies, and work in a field that I was very passionate about, and then asked to open some offices in Detroit and Chicago, and found my way to New York, and then did a stint at one of the creative agencies in New York, and sort of learned a little bit about, candidly, what I liked and what I didn't understand, and then had the opportunity to move over into the media space, and to be honest with you, I hope the advice I got may be helpful for somebody out there, but when I came in, I knew nothing, Broxton, about media. You couldn't give me a media plan and tell me to do. I couldn't. There's nothing I could do right when I was handed a media plan, and somebody said, "Listen, we're gonna move around some people, and we want you to lead the digital media team, and have them start thinking the way you guys have done in the content space. Meaning, how do we create more engaging content? How do we turn, what might have been a traditional homepage takeover or banner ad into something that people actually wanted to stop and pay attention to?" And honestly, Broxton, I went home, and I freaked out. I couldn't sleep. I was still younger at the time, and I was like, I can't lead a team I know nothing about. And I came in. I won't mention any names, but this person is still at Publicis, and probably my best friend in the agency world, let alone the real world. And they said, I came in and I said, I can't do this. I know nothing about this space. I know nothing about media. And they said, we don't want you to know anything about media. If you know media, you're just going to do what we've always been doing, and we don't want that. We want someone who's going to say, why are we doing it this way? Why aren't we thinking differently? Why are we taking credit for things we didn't do? And candidly, that sort of reset everything for me. I was like, I understand now that they want somebody, and that's why I'm so adamant about it when I mentioned it to you. Like, they want somebody with an opinion. They want somebody who's going to say, like, why would we ever waste our time, energy, or money doing something we know no one is going to spend any time paying attention to? And that honestly was the start of the larger content team, Broxton, at Spark, and then across Publicis, and into what I'm doing now. So I'm very grateful and lucky in that for the most part they reward entrepreneurship, and so taking that kind of thinking and applying it in a strategic manner, and demonstrating where there are lanes that we can do things differently, and lead to growth and new clients and new opportunities, has got us to where we are now.
Yeah, no, I mean, that is super cool to hear. I mean, what a cool story, obviously. I'm sure when you told your friend, I can't do this, that wasn't what you were expecting to hear back, but it
No.
totally makes sense. And obviously, backs up exactly what you were saying earlier of like, somebody with an opinion is so much more valuable than somebody without that just knows how to do the tactics but has no opinion. That's so cool to have a actual story that backs that up too.
Yep, that's why.
I guess like over the years too, was there any, especially early on in your career, was there any moments where like, you had like a big mess up or failure that actually led to, like I know for me, a couple of my biggest mess ups ended up resulting in me totally restructuring everything and coming out with way more momentum and, much more clarity on what I was doing. Did you have any moments like that that you had like some really great learnings from?
Yes. I think there were a lot along the way, and it's the same cliche that you hear a lot. At first you don't agree or you think you're right or whatever, and you have a little time to think about it, and you realize like I can learn from whatever this experience or this mistake was. Like, to give you a couple of examples, I and I'll explain when I messed up because I know that was part of the question. But I can also tell you that throughout my career, and I think a lot of people experience this, like I had a lot of really bad bosses. I've had really good bosses, but I've had a number of very terrible bosses. And at the time, I didn't recognize that that was the case because I didn't have the experience to know that. But what it did was when I got out from under whatever that situation was, you realize I just learned what I never want to do. And I think there's something really powerful in recognizing that you don't want to be a leader that diminishes somebody's role or doesn't encourage somebody to speak up or micromanages in a way that limits their capacity for creativity or ideas. And so I, as much as I hated it when I was in it, when I was out of it, you take a step back and go, wait a minute, I now know what I never would want to do to somebody else that I'm either going to work with or for, or someone's going to work for me. And like a lot of people too, to answer your question more directly, I was fired from a job not a while ago already, but it was one of those things where you feel like a total failure at the time. And then you realize again when you're removed from that situation, like, did I do things that didn't deliver what it was that they were looking for? Sure, but you also recognize like maybe I wasn't in the right place. Maybe this person didn't really even know what they needed out of the people that they had on the team, as evidenced by the fact that they eventually dissolved that organization. So, I think it it always hurts when you're in it. But I would encourage anybody, if they can, to take a step back and think about what they can take away from it and apply to their next situation. Again, cliched advice, I know, but it actually holds true.
I mean, it's some great advice though. I'm thinking back to another guest that I had. I don't know if you know who Casey Herbis is,
Yeah,
but
sure.
he, similarly just switched roles and said like, when I realized that I was moving on from that last role, it was like, what did I do wrong? Like, how have I got to this point, and now I feel like a failure. But the next thing you know, a couple hours or maybe a day rolls on and you're having people reach out,
Yep.
what's the next opportunity? What's the next move going to be? And, you're right back in your groove, probably with more motivation than you had before of like, I'm going to prove these people wrong who just got rid of me.
Yeah.
So that's super cool to hear. And I think, being that getting fired is probably the biggest fear of any entry level employee. I know, like, not as much at Publicis because everybody's just awesome. But my first role, I definitely like everything I did. I was like, oh my god, if I mess this up, I'm probably gonna get fired. But like in reality, one little mess up that's kind of expected from an entry level person. It happens all the time.
Yeah.
You're not gonna get fired from it. So that's cool to hear though too. That if stuff does hit the fan and you're not in the right spot, you can definitely still rebound and come back from a bad situation.
Yeah, you really have to. I mean, I know to your point, when it happens the first time, you're devastated, right? Or you don't know what you did wrong, or like Casey said, it's what did I do to lead to this end result, and that's totally natural. And then, like you said, you have friends around you, you have people around you, you yourself recognize like I have something very valuable to contribute, and I'm going to find a way to do that.
No, yeah, that is, yeah, great breakdown. I guess I'm curious too, is speaking of like things that are wrong or things that aren't working, do you think there's anything now that in the industry is super heavy, like everybody's saying we need to bet on this, but you think they're wrong, and we're gonna maybe be looking back in a few years saying, oh man, I wish we wouldn't have put so much money towards that?
It's a fair question. My answer might be a little bit different in that I think across a lot of industries, and I understand why. Everybody has a tendency to flock towards a new shiny object, right? And it's just the nature of how business tends to work, right? When influencers were new, everybody was like, we have to do influencers. When Web3 hit, everybody was like, we've got to have a Web3 strategy, buy land in the metaverse, right? And microdramas, everybody's trying to get into the microdrama space, and not to even mention everything that's gone on with AI and whatnot. I think it's always fascinating to me in a good way when that happens, because you want to be at the forefront. You want to make sure that you're fully understanding, like, what is the next wave of things that I need to pay attention to, and where should we be investing our time, energy, dollars, what have you. And I do think that there's certain risk inherent in that, but I also think that if you don't make those moves, then I feel like you sort of stagnate, and even if it doesn't turn into anything, wouldn't you rather know what it was than not know at all and be looked at as somebody, in my opinion, who's a bit of a, I guess, curmudgeon, and or slow to adopt, or wait for everybody else to do something before you move. And I'd rather see us and anybody else make investments in something that could conceivably pay out, as long as you're doing it smart and strategically, and everything else. Like, you can't just throw money at something because you think you need to throw money at something. We used to say, like, influencers are not a strategy. Like, you have to take a step back and recognize these are individuals who come with a ton of opportunity, a ton of value, but what is it that you're actually trying to accomplish? And I think that's true of any potential investment. Is, yes, you can talk to a client about 1,000 different things. In fact, I'm hanging up with you and I'm on the phone with a client, taking them through a new idea that completely moves them into different spaces. Who knows if they'll like it, but our hope is that they recognize that we've made investments in it, we believe in it, and we believe that it would pay out for their business if they were to make strategic and smart investments in that space as well. So I wouldn't say that I've seen anything be a waste, as much as you sort of have to look at it, recognize what it can do, and realize, like, once the hype dies down, let's be the ones that are left standing with, again, the best path forward in those new ways.
No, that's a great breakdown, because like I feel like, especially when you go online and look, there's, you mentioned AI, two sides of it, of either like I hate AI, especially if you're in the creative space, like don't use
Sure.
it, you're wasting water, you shouldn't be using it, whatever. And then there's the other side of it of like, you should be automating anything that's repetitive, and using all the different models and everything that's out there. So it's cool to hear that perspective of like, you should definitely be an early adopter and check out what's new. Maybe don't go full, put the whole bank on it, but strategically make your moves, and if it doesn't work out, you still have a lot of great learnings on the
Yep,
other end of it. So
exactly.
that makes a lot of sense, and is a great way to look at it, in my opinion. And I'm happy you mentioned creators and influencers too, because I am really curious to talk with you on that. We haven't talked about that a ton on the show, and it is a super like important thing in advertising now. I
Yep.
think anybody coming in needs to have some kind of knowledge on it. And there's so much opportunity nowadays to become a creator, or an influencer, just by doing something like this and putting yourself out there on social media. I know, like, I'm sure you probably follow like Breaking and Entering Media. Have you seen them? They're in New York.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
like they started similar to me, just small little podcasts, and next thing you know, they have office space in New York, and it's a full company and everything. So it's pretty crazy how that can happen. I was watching some other interviews you did though, and I know you said that the like ring light and camera era is kind of coming to an end. Like the OG creator era is, it might already be over, to be honest. I guess I'm curious to hear, like, one, where does that take kind of come from, and then two, what do you kind of think that space is turning into?
I think the initial take on it is what we were just talking about, is like everything runs its course. Everything has a beginning, a middle, and an end for the most part, if you use storytelling analogies, which I think is relevant here. And I also think, much like any form of advertising, I say it all the time, like, consumers are not stupid. They know when they're being sold to, and I think it worked really, really well as a new emerging means by which to engage people, because they were following or listening or interacting with the people that they love. And in no way am I suggesting that that era is over, but it evolves. And I think, there used to be 1,000 influencer agencies, and now there's a handful of really good ones, of two of which obviously sit inside the Publicis umbrella. And I think they do tremendous work. And I think clients understand the power of a true influencer strategy and approach and all of those things. I think my comment was much more, there is the easy path, which is like the whole phone and a ring light, and today I'm going to talk about this brand, tomorrow I'm going to talk about this brand, and eventually a consumer's like, you're just, all you are is a shill for whoever's going to write a check, as opposed to somebody on our end actually building out a cohesive influencer strategy and what they need to deliver, and becoming one with the brand, so it feels much more authentic than just, let me try to sell you something. So I think that's the evolution, if I distill it down a little, Broxton. I think when it comes to, and again, this is only my opinion, influencers versus creators, and I know other people have their own takes, or maybe even a similar take, is like, if you look at, and again, it's an overplayed, example at this point, but like, the backrooms obsessions and iron lung of it all, where you've had these people who built these incredible followings over time on YouTube, but they demonstrated an understanding of narrative and storytelling and creative and production and engagement and all of these things, and then translated that into something that Hollywood was in desperate need of in terms of original IP and original storytelling, and being able to be adept and smart at what it is that they were actually building, creating, and then using the audience that had been supporting them that whole time to come out and succeed in the way that they succeeded. Like, that's a tremendous evolution, and also where, to answer your question, where we're now starting to see things go. Like, I can't name names specifically, but the number of production entities that are out there now mining for the next YouTube creator to help them create the next obsession, is more than one. We can say that, right? And I think that's what you're going to see a lot of now, is creators as networks, creators as film moguls, creators as producers. Like, that to me is super exciting, and I think you're going to see a migration of a lot of that talent, not just in the theatrical space, but in the TV space, the streaming space, the microdrama, all of it. I think there's a world of creativity that exists there that is just now emerging.
No, that's so cool to hear. I've been telling people for a while, especially like whenever you go and make some content, you're always gonna have some buddies who give you a little bit of shit. But especially those people, like I personally think that creating content, especially as a young person right now, is probably one of the most valuable things you can be spending your time on. Even like, I don't know, somebody could see one of these videos 10 years from now and be like, oh shit, he interviewed Eric Levin. I know that dude, and I like Broxten way more now. So just I see the value in it, and then hearing you kind of break it down like that definitely just reinstates what I was thinking. But it's also like it's cool to think about how it's gonna evolve, and then like when we get to this point you're talking about, where we're seeing the influencers start to be much more mainstream, and the content creators go into these crazier roles, like that they're not just looked at as content creators. I'm really curious to see where's it going to evolve from there. I know a lot of people in 2020 were not thinking we'd be sitting where we're sitting in 2026, so it's cool to think about where am I going to be mid-career, how are things going to look. It's hard to even think about.
Yes, exactly right. But I think, to your point, you're a content creator. You get how this works. You get how to drive audience. You get how to storytell. I don't know what it was, but you mentioned a refresh of your content strategy and what you want to accomplish with your podcast. So it's thinking about it in those terms and understanding all of those things. The best creators we work with understand all the things that we talked about, but they also understand brand strategy, KPIs, ROI, all the things that go into actually launching something successfully. And, the people that do it don't just understand that they have to make a good film. The film marketing side of it, the building of the audience and getting them excited, is an art unto itself. So I think that's where, in my opinion, again, creators are those that are thinking of it in a completely different way.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. That's a great breakdown. If you can answer, could you share what you, if recently or even within, the last year or two, what do you think has been one of the most like extravagant displays of, utilizing these creators and these influencers to actually drive value? Because I've also, I've seen a lot of creator campaigns flop and you just see
Oh yeah.
all negative comments, nothing great coming of it. The creators losing followers from collabing with the wrong brand. But I'd love to hear, a success story.
I mean, as you can probably tell, I love movies. I've always loved movies, and I think just again, looking at the world of the A24s and the neons and focus and whatnot, and how they engaged a whole army of creators to help them build film campaigns that resonate and matter, and go to such creative extremes in the best of ways to get people engaged and wanting to pay attention. I know when what was the ping pong movie?
Marty
Marty,
Spring.
whatever. Yes, the amount of creativity that went into that overall campaign from A24 and the various ad agencies that they engaged, and the talent themselves and whatnot. Like, they were everywhere, flying orange blimps through LA and standing on the top of the sphere, and dropping different things all over the place, and faux campaigns. And what was it, like that 18-minute like unhinged interview that Timothy did with the ad creative, like those kinds of things, I think, are how you take something that you're trying to sell and turn it into entertainment itself. The Obsession campaign followed a similar suit. I don't know if you remember Longlegs, which, a lot of this is obviously horror, because I think horror has more runway than most to get really creative, but like releasing, the heartbeat of the woman when she saw Nick Cage's character for the first time, like as part of the marketing. It was just, it's brilliant in its simplicity, but also in its impact. So I would say those kinds of things are get what personally get me so excited, because the creativity is so off the charts in terms of what you would expect versus what's expected, that that I think has led, and you can tell by the box office success that it clearly hit a chord, and people have talked about it long. They talk about the marketing almost as much as they talk about the film, and it resonates long after the film has left theaters. So those are some of the ones that I love.
No, those are two great examples. And like you said, like same for me. It totally just gets me excited thinking about that because it's like, man, who was in the room that came up with that idea? They're probably looking at that person like, oh my God, what a genius. But when they came up with it, it probably didn't sound like some crazy, insane idea that everybody would love. Like the heartbeat thing. I remember seeing that.
Yeah.
Crazy. And then also the interview with Timothy Chalamet. That was literally my entire LinkedIn feed was
Yeah,
clips
of
of,
course.
him in that Zoom interview.
Yeah. Well, that's what the earned potential and reward from something like that is just huge. I mean, it everybody hates the word viral and virality and whatnot, but they achieved all of those things by doing what they did, and then they put it in the hands of other people and said, you know, here you go, have at it, enjoy, interact, participate, and they did.
Yeah, no, if you do the right things when you're making the content and making the strategy, it kind of just works itself out. It seems like the general public will get the stuff out there if it's good stuff.
For sure, for sure.
Well, that's awesome to hear. I got one more good one for you, Eric, and then I got a few fun ones to wrap up with, and then we'll get you out of here. But I guess this one is, super important to me. It's probably one of the questions that I've gotten the most value out of as far as just asking professionals this. But if you can just, think back to when you were sitting in the same seat as me, 22, 23, just kind of figuring things out, super ambitious, but also, super ignorant. You have no idea what's about to unfold in front of you for the next however many years. What is the one thing that if Eric could, how you sit today could go back to that version of Eric, what's the one thing you'd probably tell him?
Oh man, I would probably tell myself, I hate to say this like this, but I would tell me you're an idiot. Like, I was such an idiot, Broxton, when I was 23, 24, 25. Like, the things you do and say and act and all of it's like, I part of it is just being young, obviously, but like, not having any sense of what business actually meant early on, and having to learn the hard way that this was something that was going to define the rest of your career, and all of that, and telling myself, like, not I don't, like, not get your shit together as much as it's be better. You can do better, and you know how to think critically, you know how to apply that thinking, and you know what you're actually capable of. So don't be stupid.
Yeah, that is definitely some great advice. I feel like every year I look back and I'm like, man, I was acting crazy at some point last year and I don't know why I was. And that's just so true. There's always moments where you're questioning, like, why did I do that in the past? Because you're more enlightened, you learn more as you go on.
Of
So
course. I
that
mean, but I would say too, though, like, you still have to afford yourself the ability to make mistakes. I had another boss who I actually liked, who used to say, like, let's make better mistakes tomorrow, because you don't not want to fuck up, because there's no one who's perfect. There's no one who's not going to make a mistake. It's like you said before, you do have to realize, like, it's not always the end of the world, and you probably beat yourself up over it more than anyone else would ever beat themselves up, and all of that. But I would say afford yourself some runway, but at the same time, like, you got to reel it in when you need to reel it in.
Yeah, yeah, just like having the self-awareness of looking back and just auditing a little bit of how you've been
Yeah,
doing is
exactly.
always a good thing to do. But
Yes.
you're not going to be perfect, and you're not going to learn anything if you're not making mistakes, quite frankly. So that's a great take. To kind of wrap things up here, though, this I do this in every episode. It's super fun. Just the rapid fire segment at the end here. I'll just ask you some quick questions. First thing that comes to mind, just shoot, and it'll be fun, I promise.
Okay.
So obviously, I sit in Detroit, big in the Detroit ad scene. Obviously, it's all auto industry. Everybody talks about cars. I always love asking my guests, when you were my age, what were you driving, and what did that lead to you driving now?
Well, I'm from the Detroit area as well, and believe it or not, my grandmother did the books at a junkyard just outside Detroit. She was a tough lady, and they got me my first car, which was a 1981 Plymouth K car. Which, if you haven't seen that, you can look it up. I think it topped out at about 12 miles an hour, but it was a way to get around. It was great, and I was just happy to have a car. In full transparency, I'm not what you might consider a car guy. I have two little kids, so we have a Volkswagen Atlas, which seats seven, and I have a Jeep Wrangler because we live close to the beach.
Nice, yeah. It's funny. A lot of my guests have Jeeps. It's a common
Yeah,
theme in advertising, I feel like.
probably.
So you also sit in New York now. Have been in Detroit. First question, this will have a follow-up to Detroit style or New York style pizza?
Detroit style. Detroit. Buddy's
Detroit style.
Pizza. Yeah, Buddy's Pizza was where I remember going about a million times when I was a kid, and when I lived in Chicago, they had Jed's Pizza, which I think is also a Detroit original, and we always used to order Detroit style pizza. In full transparency, I work in New York, I live in New Jersey, and there is some exceptional New York pizza. I have not found exceptional New Jersey pizza. Don't tell anybody.
Okay, interesting. New Jersey bagels though?
I mean, we lived in the West Village for a long time, so once you get hooked on New York bagels, Broxton, there's no going back. I don't care what anybody says. Pizza
Okay.
you can debate. There's a lot of things you can debate. In New York bagels, there's Murray's bagels are the best bagels in my opinion.
Okay, I'm still yet to go to NYC. I've had New Jersey bagels and everybody told me, those are the best bagels you can get, but now, excited to try that on
They're
top
not
of the
bad.
pizza
They're,
when I go to New
they're,
York.
they're not bad by way how bagels go. Certainly, they are more than passable for sure. But it's not New York.
Okay, no, yeah, noted for sure. This one will definitely be a fun trip down memory lane. What would you say is your favorite spot on campus to go to for a night out?
Oh man, I don't
Going
even
back
know
to
if
the
it
MSU
still,
days.
I don't even know if it still exists.
A lot of the classics are still there.
What is it? Just remind me. So I lived in Holden.
Okay.
And there was when I was there, I did not participate directly. There were all of the riots and fires and different things. I don't know if anybody remembers those from back in the day, but remind me what's still there, and I'll tell you which ones we frequented.
So still there, especially as far as like classics, the Riv, there's
Yep,
Land Shark,
Land Shark.
Rick's I
Right.
know has been there forever.
Yep. Yep. All of them. Land Shark,
Harbors,
I
yeah.
remember going, they still have that ridiculous drink with all the sharks in it.
Yeah, the Shark Bowl.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yep. Yep. All of those things. Those were all on the weekend list to hit.
Love it. And then last one here. What was your favorite spot on campus at Michigan State?
Oh man. I honestly, what I would say is it the whole campus was so nice, and especially in the fall. I just remember it being absolutely beautiful to just walk around and I don't know honestly, and this isn't really a cop out because I mean it. Like there wasn't a spot. It was just I always enjoyed being on that campus because it just felt like a good place to be. I don't know if it still exists. We used to call it the Tundra because in the winter it was awful. Between Holden, there was a giant plot of land and then tennis courts and everything else. And, that was probably my least favorite because the wind could pick you up and throw you, about 10 feet. But the campus itself, I just thought was gorgeous.
No, I totally agree with you. Whenever anybody asks me, what I miss most, it's probably just my walks on campus, like
Yeah,
walking to
that's
class and
what I
walking
mean.
back. You take it for granted in the moment, but like looking back, like those were some of the most chill, no stress, enjoying my scenery type of days.
Yeah.
So
I actually never minded staying up there on the weekends. I know a lot of people would leave, but it'd be a great place to sort of hang and get into trouble. So it was good.
yeah, I totally agree. Well, hey, we'll have to get you back up there sometime soon, Eric. I know they'd love to hear from you over at ComArts. Everybody loves a good guest speaker, so you have a lot of awesome stuff to share. I'm definitely going to be giving the professors I know the link to this YouTube video when it drops because I'm sure they'll want to share it with their students. So, but that wraps what we have for you, Eric. Thanks again for taking the time to hop on today. I know it's not easy to carve out an hour out of that calendar. So this was so awesome. I know I learned a ton. I'm sure the audience is on the exact same page. But yeah, like I said, thank you so much. And until the next time, Eric.
No, thank you for having me, Broxton. I thoroughly enjoyed it and happy to come back anytime.
Sounds like a plan. We'll have to do episode 2.
Thank you.